Welcome to Inspiring Working Lives, the Morgan Hunt podcast where we explore public sector leadership journeys. From honest chats about career highs and lows, to lessons and wisdom to inspire the next generation of leaders that will shape our society.
Hello and welcome to the Morgan Hunt Inspiring Working Lives podcast. Today's guest is Pablo Lloyd OBE. Pablo is a British social entrepreneur, advisor and author who has spent more than 2 decades working at the intersection of business, education and social impact. He is best known as the chief executive and co-founder of Visionaires, a social enterprise dedicated to supporting entrepreneurship and helping individuals develop the skills and confidence to start and grow businesses. Earlier in his career, Pablo trained as a chartered accountant in the City of London before moving into senior leadership roles across the private, public and third sectors, including serving as a finance director in the music industry at the Performing Rights Society, PRS. Alongside his commercial career, he has been a long-standing advocate for technical education, skills development and entrepreneurship, helping to create programs that enable people to access opportunity and build successful careers. Pablo has also played an influential role in the UK's skills sector. He served for more than a decade on the board of WordSkills UK, championing excellence in technical education and careers for young people. In recognition of his work, he was awarded an OBE in 2019 Queen's Birthday Honours for services to WordSkills UK and the development of young people's skills. He is the author of the Financial Times Guide to Business Ethics, a practical leadership book that explores how organisations can embed ethical thinking into everyday decision making. The book has recently been nominated for Business Book of the Year, recognising its impact and relevance for modern leaders. Drawing on insights from senior leaders and real-world case studies, it argues ethical leadership should be operational rather than aspirational, and provides practical frameworks for building trust, accountability and long-term organisational success. Through his advisory work, writing and speaking, Pablo Lloyd promotes the idea that strong ethics and strong performance go hand in hand, and that principled leadership is essential for organisations navigating the complex challenges of the modern economy. Pablo, welcome to Morgan Hunt.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
It's great to have you here. We're going to start off by talking about your life and career. But to begin with, let's talk about childhood. How was your childhood and did you have any career aspirations?
My first career aspiration was actually to become a drain cleaner. that was the...
Wow.
We lived on a really busy road, and this big yellow machine used to come, I don't know, once a month or so, and clean out the drains, sort of. And I thought it was really cool. And, you know, you'd get a nice sort of uniform, and you'd be close to home, and, you know, that was. So, but anyway, that all changed when I was about 8 or 9. And something happened, I think, in my brain, which switched on, particularly to maths. And suddenly maths became an easy subject for me, and stayed easy for exactly 10 years until I was 18. So that was my thing. So I wanted to be a maths professor.
Right.
And I was going to solve all the problems that nobody had ever solved before. There was something called Fermat's last theorem that was it's been cracked now, but at the time it'd been around for, you know, a long time, and I was going to solve that and all that. And, you know, I was lucky enough, I got a bursary to a really good school that got me into Cambridge University, studied maths, of course, and things fell apart a bit then, because the maths, particularly at Cambridge, is famously difficult. And it suddenly got out of reach. So, I got through the degree, I did okay in the end, learnt how to study, because it had come easily to me until then. and then worked out that it was time to make myself useful to the world. So that's when I applied for chartered accountancy training. My dad said, if you're an accountant, you'll always be okay, and he was right.
Yes.
You know, none of my parents have been to university. You know, but they were really keen on education, furthering ourselves. Both my sisters became architects. I became chartered accountant. You know, we were just set really from that inspiration from our parents, and and did what we would now call an apprenticeship at Arthur Anderson and Co. Trained up there, and that was in the early 80s, and really that set the course for my career.
Wow, that's really interesting. So guys like me who can't do maths hold guys like you in a state of awe and sort of deification.
Yeah, don't do that.
Do this. Right. Well, I have got some good news for you. The profession you initially aspired to is actually called a gully sucking driver, those machines. And I, many years ago, had a job placing gully sucker drivers with local authorities.
I've got a name for it now, a gully sucking driver.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
what I'm right. That was my first aspiration. Thank you.
There we go.
It's got a name.
So, chartered accountant.
Yeah.
Where did that go for you then initially?
Well, it was. I mean, it was fabulous, really. I mean, it was. I mean, you probably know Arthur Anderson eventually failed as an organisation, and that's actually come back into my thinking when I'm looking at business ethics. But as a training ground for young well-educated graduates, we were all kind of very similar kind of academic background. And they really pushed us. And it was up or out. You either got promoted every year or you got thrown out every year. That was it. That was the deal. So through that training process, which was rigorous and challenging, after 3 years, there were less than half of us left in that cohort because of the up or out rule. And I stayed on for an extra year. So I went the whole hog. I did chartered accountancy and tax advisory exams,
right,
which was an extra year at the end. And then found myself in the middle of deregulation this was mid-80s, which you're far too young to remember all that.
No, I'm afraid not.
And it was really a feeding frenzy of greed.
Yeah.
And not far from here, I was working in the city. I joined a fund management firm. I was getting calls from headhunters all the time saying, how much money do you want? That kind of thing. And it was, yes, I was learning a lot. I was being paid well, but there was something not quite working for me. And I didn't figure out what it was at the time. And eventually that led me to... So I was in the finance stream, in financial services, and eventually found my way into Nationwide Building Society, which was another ethical lesson, a positive one in that case. And that was also an interesting time because it was when building societies were converting to banks. So it was mid-90s by now. And I was working for a long-time mentor of mine, a man called John Hutchinson, who I'm still in touch with. And he was a director at Nationwide, and I was his, chief of staff effectively. And that was another lesson in this case. I'd learned how not to lead, and I was getting lessons in how to lead from John and also another individual who was the chief exec at the time. So a quick story about that, shall I? Because it's important to what happened next. So this was about 1996, so exactly 30 years ago. And I was by then I was a manager responsible for the savings products. And we were called into a meeting with the chief exec, and he said, look, all our competitors are converting into banks. So building societies owned, part of the cooperative movement, owned by their savers, mortgages and loans, simple business. But one by one, Abbey National, Halifax and so on, they were essentially persuading their savers to take a windfall of money and then the building society would then be owned in the stock market and effectively operate like a bank with more freedoms, ability to do everything that banks do. And he called us in, and we thought, this is it. And I was ready. I was going to be writing to the savers saying, look, here's a windfall, please support us in this. And he said, I've been thinking about this, and the thing that stuck in my mind, he said two things. One, we're not here to make money. And there was a sharp intake of breath around the room, because most of us had come through that deregulation, that kind of world of greed. And there was somebody saying something different. And he said, I think we're here to give peace of mind to our customers. Now we'd call that a purpose statement. In those days it was, look, this is what we're here to do. And he said, because of that, we can't quite see what the point of converting into a bank would be, but I'd be interested in your views. We had a bit of a conversation. We were all a bit sort of thrown by it, to be honest. And of course, what happened after that, 30 years now, that was my last job in financial services. Then I went into music, but I now watch the ads on the TV of Nationwide Building Society with Dominic West, who plays an arrogant banking personality, pinstripe suits.
Yeah, I love the one. Yeah,
and they're quite funny. They're quite sharp, a little bit controversial sometimes, and poking fun at banks and saying you should be with an organisation you can trust. Nationwide, that's what they say, and that reminds me, because when I watch them, I realise that's not just a marketing department coming up with a clever film. It goes right back to the roots, 30 years before that, saying this is what we stand for. Back before that, when they were a cooperative between savers and mortgage holders. It runs deep in the organisation, which they've hung on to. They've doubled their market share. They were not particularly affected by the global financial crash, which was 2008 roughly. And ironically, and here's a nice twist in the tale, Northern Rock, who converted at the same time, and they were canary in the mine, if you remember.
Yes.
Beginning financial crash. Suddenly there was a run on savings. They overstretched. They couldn't let savers get access to their funds, and that's when the dominoes started falling. That was 2007. Their assets were swept up by Virgin Money. And Virgin Money, a few months ago, were acquired by Nationwide Building Society. So Northern Rock came full circle back home to arguably where they should have stayed all along.
That's a brilliant story, isn't it? Because, yes, as you say, 96, that was kind of okay, we're all going to go for this, we're going to go for it, and it ends in disaster in 2008.
Exactly.
But that statement made by... Was it the chief exec?
Yeah, Brian Davis, yeah.
Okay, that statement, was that a lens almost that every decision within the building society kind of went through to make sure it was held in the appropriate status?
I think it was. The thing is, I shortly after that, I followed my long-time mentor who had gone to the Performing Rights Society in the music industry. Yeah. As his CFO, so I didn't stay in Nationwide. Not that it was a great place to work. What I've seen from the outside, I'm still a customer, is that yes, they have stayed true to that sense of we're doing the right thing. We're not chasing the dollar. We're protecting your money, and their business. Because the other insight is it's not just about doing the right thing. It's about having a business model that connects with that. Because it's business, you've still got to, make the P&L and the balance sheet work. And their clever model is that they say, look, we're trustworthy. We don't pay the best possible rate for savers or the lowest possible rate for mortgage holders. We're up there and they've had a policy of, as I've understood it, of staying in the top 3 or top 5. But they don't have a cheap deal for a month and then they pull it and another They are very consistent, and because of that, they've just attracted more and more market share, and they're not taking great chunks out of their margin while they're doing it because they're not trying to compete with, today's cheap deal. They are just staying up near the top, and that imbues their decision making, their rate setting, their marketing. as we're seeing now. So it's a clever business model as well as being a principled one.
Yes. Okay. Got it. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about ethics and just how these things play out in the real world shortly. But just to carry on your sort of career journey, PRS.
Yeah.
As a wannabe rock musician, that sounds really exciting, but I suspect it was a lot of possibly not exciting stuff.
Well, Dan, I mean, you are a rock star and I'm not, so I'm careful sort of how I talk about this. But I mean, I've always loved music. I can't play. I don't have a sort of a talent in that area, but as a consumer, absolutely. And as I say, my long-time mentor was appointed chief executive, and there was a connection with financial services, because essentially the music copyright is a sort of, or their organisation is a machine which collects all the amounts that are due, and in this case to songwriters and music publishers, and then make sure they're fairly calculated to then pay out to the creators and publishers of music. And it's at the time it was about a 400 million turnover in the UK. I'm sure it'd be a lot more now. And it was in the days. It was a really interesting time because it was music streaming was just starting to. So we were just starting to look at how disruptive that would be. There was a big discussion about the fairness between classical and pop music. 'Cause at the time, classical had a booster. So they were paid twice as many royalties per minute as pop songs. So there were these kind of crunchy, kind of difficult questions that were being grappled with. And the key thing from a business point of view is we went through a merger with a related business that was using the same kind of algorithms, but was more biased towards the rights of music publishers, which was called the Mechanical Copyright Protection Society. Wow. And John and I and the rest of the management team and the board managed to put this merger together, which we'd been talking about for decades. And really, I was there to help him push that through and make it work financially. And we pulled it off, and that was, it meant that we were able to give better value to the creators of music, which was really the point of the organisation.
So important, and probably even more challenging now with the advent of AI and what that's doing to...
Indeed. I mean, the whole world of intellectual property, copyright and so on is now being really challenged by the arrival of our digital cousins in AI.
Sense of fairness, I guess, in that role as well, doing the right thing again.
Yeah, and it was John as a mentor. I mean, that he was one of the people who I learnt from. So all of these things were kind of adding up to something, and even back, reaching back to my dad was a broker in the fruit and vegetable market in Spitalfields, not too far from here, and he used to talk to me about the city. And he used to talk about the London Stock Exchange. My word is my bond is their motto. So he looked up to the city, and then I worked in the city, and I thought, this is not quite what my dad told me about, because he saw it from outside. That's where the posh people worked, and he was just a broker trying to, sort of earn a living as a self-employed person. So there was this mystique about what ethics looked like. And I think that was part of it for me. And so when I saw things that didn't add up to that ideal, there was just a seed planted in all of those working experiences and the things that I related to were the things that were not about money. So I was a finance person, but there was things that not to do with money. I was thinking, giving customers peace of mind, and my word is my bond, and what's really fair here. That's the bit that was just, I suppose, bubbling up, and has now become an obsession.
Yes, right, okay. But you do make a change at this point, a fundamental change to go into sort of social enterprise.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was another of a colleague from your sector, headhunter ringing up and saying, look, there's an opportunity to work in education. And, we'd completed this merger in Performing Rights Society. It was a lovely place to work. But I got this call and they said, look, we want somebody with finance skills, intellectual property skills in a startup in the education sector. And I heard this word education and I thought, I get to work in education, which had been so important for me as a young person, and it really sort of made everything that meant that I could, earn a living, make a contribution and so on. Anyway, and it was an awkward conversation. This was a mentor I'd worked on and off for 15 years to say, John, I've been here 3 years only. We've done the deal. I think I want to go. And he was wonderful, the way a mentor should. He said, great, well, is it really what you want? Make sure that's it, and then I'll support you completely. He was wonderful in that sense. And that was it. And that, 26 years on from that, I stayed in education. So it was an organisation called Learn Direct. So it was a government initiative, and I was one of the first three people to join as the CFO. There was a CEO and an IT director, and we saw it through. Well, I was the only one that survived till it was privatised. So back to the kind of nationwide story. So I was there for 12 years, and we went from government agency to public body, and there were all subtleties of what a public body is. We went through those changes. And we built it as a charity with a commercial subsidiary, and that's something that felt right to me, and that was something I had to persuade the board of. This is the right structure. So as a charity commercial subsidiary, we can in a sense look up to government and say we are working in the public good, and look out to our supply chain and participants, students, and say, but we'll work in a commercially effective way to give you the best education. So it was a nice kind of hybrid model. And then by the end, my end there, which was 12 years later, we figured out that the government, with these initiatives too, they kind of got a bit bored with us, that we'd done what they intended to do, and now we need to find our own way in the world. And that was fine. We said, okay, well, we'll privatise. And again, that was a big discussion. And the way that worked is we sold the commercial entity to private equity, which was a private equity investor that knew that sector well. And then the charity got the windfall. We also got incentives as the management team to make that happen. And that was the point where I got bitten by the education bug and by the startup bug. And at the point where I was in a good financial state, it was time for me to say, okay, well, you go off to private equity, because I know that's a world. I get why the organisation needs it, but I've been there before and that's not where I want to go. And I just started setting up. I started with a consultancy, then worked with the college to set up a business school, then set up Visionaires as a training ground for early stage entrepreneurs. And that was all entirely social enterprise work. It was about a social impact, helping people get up the ladder, apply my expertise, and also build teams that could carry that on into the future. And I mean, they've all had sticky moments. It's the world of entrepreneurship. But they've all survived in one shape or form. Even Learn Direct, that went into private equity, because they had a really tough time about 3 years into that, where the balance of money and purpose got a bit confused in the eyes of the private equity investors. Sometimes happens. But they managed to pull out of that, and all those initiatives are still going and still adding value to people's lives.
Brilliant. Okay, so that must feel great. It's like a purpose of all this sort of career history in terms of what you're building and feeling good about stuff. And many of those individuals went off to have successful careers and build businesses.
Indeed, yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Morgan Hunt, a public sector recruitment agency with over 30 years of experience. Whether you're looking for your next role or growing your team, we match purpose-driven people with organisations making a real difference. Visit morganhunt.com to find out how Morgan Hunt inspires working lives.
Okay, so it's really interesting to hear that journey, Pablo. And I know what happens next, and we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
But actually, when you look at it in reverse, it makes perfect sense. Each of those building blocks leads to the next.
Yeah.
It's a perfect narrative.
Yes, it does. It does sound like it, and I probably make it sound more logical than it was. Because in truth, it's not like that at all. One of the things I've done a lot of mentoring with young people and people in mid-career as well, and I think people look at careers near their end, like mine, and think, right, there must be some plan and some sort of magic kind of way of doing this, because it kind of all comes good in the end. And honestly, I don't know anyone, including me, where there was a plan. All of those key moments of change, of changing jobs within a sector, of changing sectors, which I've effectively done twice, of that I look back and they were all small decisions at the time, which actually many of them made no sense whatsoever. So when I moved from music into education, we just we had a young family, we had a kind of a 1-year-old, another one on the way. This was a job which would be 200 miles away from home. It would be really tough going. It was less money than the job I was in. There were all decisions like that. It wasn't a plan. I want to work in education. It was, I've got this opportunity, and a conversation with dearly beloved about how does this affect our lives, and just I suppose what's interesting to me about it now, looking back, is there was a little voice in there which was getting more and more influential in how my career was going, which was steering me in where I finished up. And I managed to listen to it enough at key moments that it took me in a direction which has been hugely personally satisfying, even if at the time it was by far from the obvious thing to be doing. And and a lot of the colleagues that I worked back in the city, they made a lot more money than me. They retired a lot earlier than I did. Well, I haven't retired. I mean, I'm still going because I love what I do, and I sometimes think, what would that track have been like? And what I find interesting now, comparing notes with old friends from university and from those early days, is that the driver of doing something that felt right and worked for my gut was for me seemed to be a more important driver than other old friends, and they've had wonderful careers as well. But the hindsight's a wonderful thing, and I can make sense of it now. But it was going back to music analogy, it was improv all the way.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I guess there's some of those people though who may have thought that little voice was there, and they should have gone to do something a bit different. And maybe there's a few regrets there, I guess.
There may be. I remember one conversation. It wasn't a friend. It was somebody. I was at a dinner where pretty much everyone else there was an investment banker, and there was me, and and I was chatting to one of them, and was saying, "Oh, what do you do? What do you do?" And this was mid-career, and he said to me, "Oh my God, you're doing something useful." And I thought, yeah, but don't you think you're doing something useful, doing investment bank? Isn't that the point?
Yeah.
But for him, he was saying, "Yeah, I'm doing it because I'm earning a lot of money," and that wasn't my driver.
No. It is a useful thing, I think, particularly at mid-career, to actually just stop and try and locate that inner voice. And I think a lot of people whether they're blinded by money, or they also feel it's the only thing they know, and it's the only environment they're going to be comfortable in is the one they've known for 10, 15, 20 years.
There is that. There is a sense of how you see yourself. If you see yourself as the sum of the skills that you've built up, as that keeps you on a particular track. But I always saw myself as all that plus the things that I'm dead curious about, because I've always been curious about, what do people do, how things work, how the world works, and so that's always been a driver of what have I done, what can I offer the world, and then what could I do if I put my mind to it, and that's always stretched me to believe I can do something that I've got no competence in, but could build it.
Right. That's confidence, isn't it? Yeah.
I suppose.
Yes. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Okay. So this next chunk of journey is about this book. So we've talked about ethics through your career journey until now, and the importance of it. But why write a book?
Well, actually, funny. It's one of those things. I mean, I was a numbers guy, not a words guy, and writing a book is really all about words. So I think it was a few things, and one thing that kind of tipped me over the edge, which was those experiences, from being in the city and being slightly uncomfortable with that kind of greed culture, being at Nationwide and hearing that business leader saying it's not about the money, working in education, which was a real kind of knight's move of change, because it was two things. It was changing sector, but into a sector which had a deep meaning for me personally. All of those things kind of built up to a sense of, I think I've got something to say about pursuit of how you convert your skills and your organisation, if you're a leader, into something which is not just commercially successful. And I'm a capitalist. I believe in the power of business to create prosperity, but also the obligation of business to do good. And I thought, I think I've got something to say. And what really tipped me over the edge was about 8 years ago, was when my sister passed away, which was a devastating moment. She'd been ill for a long time, and it was one of those moments where, in the grief, I was thinking, life is short. I've got, how do I make sense of, the years that I've got left to be a sort of, a productive member of the business world. And it was really two things at that time. Two things bubbled up, and it was very clear. And I remember the conversation with my wife. We were on holiday, and I was a bit, I was very sad at the time, but also just finding solace in these ideas I was having. One of them was to create Visionaires, which was to help new entrepreneurs, and the other one was the germ of the idea for, and it was at the time, what's the point of business? That was the question I was asking myself. What is the point? So those two ideas came out. So that was 8 years ago. The Visionaires thing kind of took off, and I did that. But the book was still was waiting in the wings, and it was really three years ago. I just couldn't help myself. It was, and I was doing. I was a CEO at the time, with not a lot of time on my hands, and it was, I have to start writing it now.
Right.
So 3 years ago, in the middle of the job, and then I made changes to what I was doing, and I've now given up all my executive, actually even my non-executive roles. I've stopped in order to, during that period, write the book, research it. I interviewed 50 leaders. That there were 400 references, in fact more than that, there are 400 in the book, to back up and support the arguments I was making for ethical business and ethical leadership. And now having published the book, now talking about it, as I said earlier, it has become an obsession and a very deeply satisfying one.
I think when we talk about ethics, they're often deemed as aspirational want-to-bes, and we'd like to be this. But actually, your book makes it operational and encourages operational thinking around ethics. Yeah. Is that right? Is that fair?
That's exactly right, and that's the insight I got from talking to 50 business leaders and presenting their case studies, and there was a whole range of examples of how you do that, and some examples how you don't do it as well. Some were very open about. They were the anonymous ones,
right?
And I think you need both. We talked earlier about the nationwide example, the sense of giving peace of mind, and it's not about making money. You need to make money, but that's not the ultimate purpose. So that's one of the insights right at the top end of having that clear sense of what many organisations call purpose and values, but in a way that's crunchy enough that when you come to the key decisions, and what I learned was every single business decision has an ethical component to it. You just have to look at it to see it. Doesn't mean you always choose the highest ethical path, but being aware of that every time you set pricing, every time you hire somebody, every time you make an investment decision, every time you're working out what the dividends should be to shareholders or which suppliers you work with, all of those have got an ethical load, some more than others. And that's what I learned from the best of the examples. And let's be honest, we're not always all at our ethical best. And and having some understanding that having a bit of forgiveness because the higher you set the bar, the more out of reach it becomes. Eventually, that can be a risk as well. That, we can never be that because it doesn't work with our business model. But when you connect that up, that high level, and what I talk about a purpose beyond profit, when you connect that up with the day-to-day decisions and behaviours, and it's not about a poster on the wall saying we stand for integrity, respect and honesty and those things. Of course those things are important, but it's when you connect it up with, in this example, there was a nice example. Let me give an example of that, how that works. So this was an example from Simon Rogerson, founder of Octopus Energy. Yeah. And he gave, this is something he does routinely in his big organisation, thousands and thousands of people, global organisation. And they have a notion of out-behaving the competition. So, and that's an important idea for them because that connects their vision, their higher purpose, with their business model. And the clue's in the name of the book. It's business ethics. It's both. You've got to keep them both in view. So his example was a nice one, which was it was the story of a smart meter installer who goes to the house of an elderly customer who is not feeling very well that day, but she's there fixing the meter in. And the customer has a funny turn, collapses, is still awake, and she's the only other person in the house, and she's fixing the smart meter. What do you do? Mm-hmm. Well, probably most people might ring for an ambulance or say, is there a relative that can look after you? They'd look to find a lifeline to help that person, get sorted out. But actually, they've got a job to do because they've got to fit the smart meter, and they've got another 7 to do in the rest of the day. Mm-hmm. So she didn't do that. She just went, right, it looks to me like you need the hospital. Made the meter safe, walked him to her car, drove to the hospital, because she'd worked out that, an ambulance takes 20 minutes, I know this guy looks like he's in trouble. Drove him to the hospital, took him straight into accident emergency, spoke to the people there and said, this one better be top of your list because something's going on with this customer. Somewhere on the way back, and anyway, he was fine, happy ending, but he was, he'd had some kind of, it was heart attack or stroke or something, it was something quite serious. On the way back, she rings her supervisor and says, by the way, you just need to know I've done this. So didn't seek permission, just did it because it was the right thing to do. That's an example. There's a load of those. That's an example. So somebody like Simon Rogerson, that happens in his business. What does he do? He tells that story to everyone else in the business and says, that's what I want you to do. So it's not a story about, how's our margins going or what's our bottom line and how much we've grown this year and what the competition are sort of doing. That it is. This is how we behave. And he's giving two messages. He's saying, because it's the right thing to do, I want you to do that as well. And we're out behaving the competition here. This is good for our business.
Yeah.
This is, okay, we've probably lost, a day of smart meter installation on that day, but that's okay, because this is about thinking long term. And that those kind of insights, and there are often short-term, long-term trade-offs. That's a good example. You're saving someone's life or you're fixing 7 smart meters. Which one do you choose? Well, you'd hope we'd all make that right decision. But the way that person behaved, the way she did it, the way he repeated it back to 16,000 people, that's the insight, and your word of operationalizing that vision. And he talked about people remember stories, not spreadsheets. So you need the running gear of the organisation. You need the KPIs. You need to watch the bottom line. You need to be efficient. You need all those things. That's fundamental to any business. But on top of that, having the ability to know what you really stand for, that's where the competitive advantage comes in. It's not just about being good, it's being about good and good for business.
Yes. And that story works on multiple levels, because if we feel we are working for an organisation that's ethically aligned, we kind of feel good about ourselves, don't we?
Yeah.
And we go home and we tell our partners and our kids what a great day at work it was, and this happened. And that's got to be good for attraction of talent, and it's got to be good for retention of talent within these organisations.
That's exactly that, and I think it does work. The most insightful stories for me were to do with the relationship between the business and its employees and colleagues, because that has a multiplier effect out with your customers, clients, supply chain partners, and ultimately shareholders. So, if there's one place to start, sometimes people ask me, where do I start? What should I be thinking about? I say, well, start about your relationship with your colleagues, because that's where you, as a leader, that's where you multiply your influence. Because you can talk to them directly, and because you have authority, they kind of have to listen to you. They don't necessarily have to follow what you say, but and also, as you say, the deeper effect is, well, I'm working for an organisation that they actually care about people. They care about me, they care about others, and I will do the same. The challenge in this, if I can say this, because this all sounds lovely.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you do this? And I'm not sure I've got all the answer to this, but sometimes people ask me, well, if this ethics malarkey is good for business, is good for good, why isn't everybody doing it? And one person said, 90% of organisations are sociopaths. I had an experience this week, trying to talk to an organisation about a service they're providing to me, and you get caught in the, doom loop of chatbots. Yeah. Yeah, where that kind of, we all know that experience. That's an example of a sociopathic organisation. We care about our customers, but we don't care enough about them to actually want to have a conversation with them, somehow. And so we've got to watch for that. So why does that happen if we're all good, lovely people? And I think that the part of it is to do with how we've set up and created businesses. And it goes right back, the first joint stock company in the world was the East India Company, which is an arm of the British Empire back in 1600. And if you look at the history of that business, that was all about the money. You know, that was trading in slaves 30 years after slavery was made illegal in this country. It was doing horrific things. It was incredibly commercial. If you're an investor in 1600, you know, boy, you know, would you make money? So I think part of the reason is there are temptations in the way, which are hard to resist. And if we're honest, and you know, there's a section called temptation in the book. If we're honest, those are there in front of us quite a lot of the time, and business gives you the opportunity to give in to those temptations, to profiteer or to take advantage of a contract that's not particularly well worded and is in your favour, to, you know, put a bit of disrespectful pressure on a colleague when you know really, you know, they're right at the end of their tether and they can't take on another piece of work, but actually you need it because it's going to make your quarterly results look good. Those temptations are always there. And do you know, it's just part of human nature. We're imperfect. You know, it's not about ethical perfection. There are laws we've put in place, and for example, modern slavery. We tried to abolish slavery 200 years ago. We worked out 10 years ago that there are more slaves in the world than there were 200 years ago. So let's put in the Modern Slavery Act. You know, that's fine, but that's not been particularly effective, if I'm honest. It's relatively straightforward to comply legally with the Act without actually driving slavery out of your supply chain in a global context. So, you know, the law is not enough. The sense of what a business is there to do is not enough. So we have to reach to our conscience. And that's the hard part. And that's why it doesn't always happen, because there's too many temptations in the way. And if we reach for our conscience and go, well, what's the right thing here? And we are able, in the business insight, if you're able to think long term, if you realise that you are in the business of trust, we all are, any business in the business of trust. And the organisation I've highlighted in the book are able to convert trust into commercial performance. That's the insight. And you can do that, but there are other ways of achieving commercial performance. That's the challenge.
And why is trust so important in this modern world with our commercial corporate institutions?
Well, I think it's becoming, and I think this is, I'm seeing this in a positive light, because I think trust is becoming more important, because we know that the trust is in short supply. There's something called the Edelman Trust Barometer that asks, it's a 30,000 person survey done globally. 60% of those that they ask, it's a global survey, believe that business leaders purposely mislead. In other words, they're doing the opposite. You know, mislead is the clue, the opposite what leaders should be doing. And that's getting worse. So there is a sense, and it's not just business leaders, but business is the bit that I know about, that we are losing trust in leaders and how they're making decisions. And that only goes one way. It goes one way because we get upset, we get active in a negative way. You know, there's a lot of work showing that people are now more comfortable being actively disruptive, you know, at a low level on social media, and at a high level we've seen things like Extinction Rebellion and other changes which are socially challenging, where people are saying, I'm going to break the rules to teach you a lesson because I don't trust you. And that is a pressure that's building up, and you can see it in all the indicators, reducing trust. So I think it's both a risk and an opportunity. We don't say, oh, we're in a bit of a cycle, I'm sure it'll all calm down. Or we can say that actually this is in my self-interest, my long-term self-interest as a leader in a business, that I'm going to go the other way and I'm going to start building trust. But you have to pedal harder, because we're in a very transparent world. If you're saying one thing and doing another, as we're seeing in political worlds, for example, you get found out. There's no carpet to hide things under. So all of those factors are leading me to the conclusion that it shouldn't just as because it's the right thing to do. It's actually in our self-interest, and the pressure is building for us as business leaders to lead the way. And we can hope that leaders in other worlds, in other parts of our society, will do that. But actually, we have an obligation, because we have power, we have authority, we have an organisation that can decide at that fork in the road which way they go.
Yes, yeah. And we all sit both sides of the fence on this, because from a corporate point of view, we all have a role to play.
Yeah.
But we're also consumers, aren't we, as well?
We are, yeah.
And I think possibly we make commercial decisions, purchasing decisions too frivolously.
Yeah.
I mean, most of us will have used a telephone today of some description, and how was that put together?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It was. I mean, it was. A month or so ago, I was in a room with 100 people talking about this. My question of the audience was, how many of you routinely check that the businesses you buy from, whether as consumers or businesses, but it's really a consumer question, are actively, and this is the slavery question, it's a really good example for this, are actively driving out slavery from their supply chain? Do you routinely check that? Because you've got a choice. You can choose, to buy from, there's hundreds of organisations on my personal supply chain. 5 people put their hand up out of 100. And this was a very informed audience. And when you look under the bonnet of that, and I've started doing that personally. I mean, I have not been checking that, because I thought, well, we've got the Modern Slavery Act, that covers it, and everyone has to be compliant, so that's fine. Do you know, it's not fine. It's not biting. It's not making the difference. So now, when I am making personal decisions about, buying my phone, getting my streaming service, getting my packages delivered, I'm making different decisions now to what I was a couple of months ago.
Right.
Because I can.
Yes. Yeah. Could this be a start of a movement, Pablo? Where we get some real sort of transparency on some of these organisations?
Well, the transparency is there.
Right.
It's kind of a fight between. So I've recently something called the Ethical Consumer app. It's a little app you can buy. It costs you about 30 quid, and that lifts the bonnet. It's very challenging, and it's got some ethical views you may not agree with. Because, of course, ethics is in the eye of the beholder. We don't all agree on everything. But it does give you a readout on just about every organisation that you buy from as a consumer.
Wow.
And it will tell you, do they use tax havens? What's their what do they pay their chief exec? What's their supply chain look like for how they operate with partners in their supply chain? What are their environmental credentials, really? Gives you a whole set of readouts, gives you a score. You get a score out of 100 on that, and you wouldn't believe that the organisation scores 0 out of 100 on the ethical apps. That's it. You've got to use it. You've got to measure it against your personal values and go, well, what do I really think about that? The transparency is there, but of course, the larger the organisation, the bigger the marketing machinery to protect the message that says we're good, we're fine, we've got a great service, and it is a kind of David and Goliath problem, because the ethical consumer sort of is a little tiny organisation which is not going to attract a great funding stream by poking the big bears, saying, well, you're not very good at this.
Yes.
They rely on us, and so that's why I choose to subscribe to that, and I choose to look at it, and sometimes it informs my decisions. But it's so is there a movement? I think there is. I think it's happening around us, and if that taps into that in every sense, and gets businesses to do what they should be doing in their long-term self-interest, that's what I'm about now.
So during this conversation, you've talked about many ethical situations, dilemmas potentially, going back to mid-80s to today. Are we getting better or worse, do you think?
I think I think it's a mixed picture. I think we are getting more transparent. So that's the good news. I think we can see there were probably things going on behind the scenes in the 70s and 80s in the world before social media. This is a positive part of social media. Now we've got Trustpilot, we've got Glassdoor, we've got the Good Shopping Guide. We've got a whole set of ways where we can look inside the workings of organisations, which then gives us a choice. I think we are in a world where very large organisations wield an enormous amount of power, because the other side of it is we're getting very global, and so now 12 of the 40 biggest economies are companies, not countries. And they don't work under democratic control, because if they don't like the tax in one country, they move to a tax haven, and they can do that. So I think that means that there are more opportunities to behave, either, depending how you look at it, either unethically or ethically neutrally. And I think neutral ethics is the wrong side of the line for me. I think that's where danger lies. So is it getting worse or better? I think overall, and I'll come back to the measure of trust, it's getting worse because we trust organisations less. And I think that's a wake-up call for us.
Okay. Pablo, the book is fantastic. One might assume it might be this sort of lofty tome about the idea of ethics, but actually it's got real toolkits in there which organisations can learn from and put into practice almost immediately. So it's very specific in what people can do to improve this situation, and hopefully, as the business part says, make a commercial difference for the organisation and the consumer. So Pablo, not only have you written this book and it's out there now, but it's up for an award as well, is that right?
It is, yeah. No, it's been nominated to be Business Book of the Year in a particular category, and we'll see how that goes.
And of course, you're in partnership with the Financial Times with this book.
Yeah. So the publisher is FT Pearson. So it's the Financial Times Guide to Business Ethics. It's part of a series of books. I think I'm right in saying it's the first one in that series which focuses on ethics. The others are about aspects of commercial activity, leadership strategy, and so on. It's a great series, but this is the first business ethics one.
I've got one last question for you.
Yeah, go on.
And I want to take you back to your career journey again. If somebody, let's say they're in their mid-30s, is sitting in an organisation somewhere and even doesn't understand how they make that jump to leadership, or alternatively, they're in an organisation where ethically they feel it's the wrong place to be, and they would like to actually give something and move into a different direction and show their true purpose. What would your advice be to them?
Well, there's probably two sides of the advice. One of them is read chapter 16 in the book, which is and it's deliberately written for people who are not leaders. And it's saying, because my message is put your conscience to work, but if you haven't got decision-making authority or partial decision-making, and you see things not quite right around you, it gives you a map of how to go about influencing around you, mindful of the personal risk attached to that, because that's you've got to be aware that sometimes organisations don't like people kind of stepping out of line. So that's a bit of a toolkit for how you go about influencing in your immediate environment. I think the wider bit of advice is that if you've got that little voice, as I had and has grown louder during my career, and it's asking you questions that are slightly uncomfortable. I think it's about taking a step at a time, discussing that with people who you love and love you, that you can test out I'm not very comfortable about this, or I wish I were doing that, or here's an area I'd prefer to be working in than what I'm doing now, and start building out, because sometimes it's about building out a little bit of courage to take that step, and take the step to look at your career and your future differently. And if you start from the end point backwards, and that, the rocking chair test, what do you want to look back on and be known for, that's one way of doing it. But for me, it's really more about those early steps, so that for me, it was about opportunities turning up. I was lucky. Sometimes you have to make them happen, which is more what I'm doing now. So it's putting yourself in a position when the opportunity turns up, or you could push at a door that might be half open, that voice has built up a bit. But it really is about a little bit of soul searching. That's where it started for me, and allowing that, because in the end we spend a lot of time working, and if you're doing something where you're not looking forward to that sort of first call in the morning, and you're kicking the cat sort of in the evening at the end of the day, thinking, well, that wasn't very satisfying. You worked yourself to at least think about doing something, and by thinking, then the actions follow.
That's great stuff. Great feedback. So, this is a brilliant book. Everybody should go and get it. We will put the link in the description underneath this video. And thank you very much for taking your time today. It's a wonderful story, and long may ethical businesses reign and prosper across our society. It's a wonderful story. Thank you, Pablo.
Thank you. That's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Inspiring Working Lives, the Morgan Hunt podcast, driving positive change and helping you to grow your career. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next inspiring conversation. For more insights, opportunities, and updates, head to morganhunt.com.